Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new PREVAILS stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Got an A-hole fired and helped a coworker get a job they wanted. About 20 years ago, I got a job at a warehouse delivery place, pulling and delivering windshields. When I started, there were 6 drivers, 1 old white guy who'd been there since humanity existed, 4 young black guys, and me, white female. I mention this only because, unfortunately, it does become important later. There were also 4 to 5 people in the office running sales, admin, including the only other female at the company. She'd wanted a delivery job, but had been told that's not a woman's job, so was stuck in the office. The guy who hired me made a big deal about how he'd stuck his neck out for me, and was getting crap from his buddies for hiring a woman. There was some undertone about equal opportunity, but I've never counted on that and made sure I went above and beyond. At the time, it was a locally owned place, and rules were not really standardized about most things. In theory, each driver was supposed to take orders for the next route scheduled, load up the next available truck, and head out. In reality, there was an unofficial pecking order, and each driver had their route and truck. As the new guy, I got the less than great pickup truck with an open air rack and various problems. Most of the other trucks were box trucks, think small moving trucks, so the windshields wouldn't get wet as they were delivered, and the driver could rearrange things inside the truck if the route got switched around for whatever reason. I also got the furthest away route with the latest delivery times, so I usually got stuck in rush hour on the way back. I know the rules, though, so I shut my mouth, sucked it up, and waited for turnover to make me not the new guy and get a better truck route. Surprisingly, turnover didn't happen. There were the usual problems with 2 of the workers not pulling their weight, but no one ever got fired. The worst offender was, of course, the guy at the top of the unofficial pecking order. We'll call him Mike. Dude was huge, easily a foot taller than me. I'm not short, I'm pretty sure all he did was work and work out, and he constantly bragged about doing steroids to get bigger. He would only take the shortest run with the fewest deliveries and spend the rest of the time talking crap with the other drivers or just randomly vanishing. A couple months after I started, I got some big orders for my routes all in a row, and asked for help so I could gather everything, load up, and head out on time. This was not uncommon. There were several machines used for pulling the stock, so if you finished your orders early, you helped others who were behind. Not Mike, though. You'd think I'd asked him to skin a puppy. Got in my face, yelling about how dare I ask him to do anything, I'm just the new guy, get out of here and don't let him see me again, etc. You get the picture. One of the other guys I'd become friends with pulled me away and helped me get loaded up and out the door, but that never really sat right with me. Mike had never been friendly to me, but after that day, he'd go out of his way to be in a hole, nothing big, but enough to seriously irritate me and intimidate the other guys to not talk to me when he was around. A little while later, I mentioned the outburst to the lady in the office, and she told me why nothing would ever be done about Mike or anyone else. Apparently the personnel guy, we'll call him Tony, had gotten fired from his previous job over a complaint about racism. He'd used the phrase, Black Friday, to refer to, well, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, when sales are supposed to get companies back in the black, financially solvent. Apparently one of his employees claimed he used it as a racist remark. It got taken to court and somehow, Tony was found guilty and fired. Basically, that meant that he couldn't take any actions against a black worker ever again, because he's got a prior judgment against him. The drivers knew that, and Mike, and one other, but he's not important here, absolutely used it to do the bare minimum required to stay employed. That didn't sit right with me either, but I was just a driver, and the new guy, so nothing I could do about it. Until a couple months later. The owner did some necessary maintenance around the place, and one of the things done was getting rid of my old truck and buying a new one that was half enclosed, half open air racks. The owner apparently said it should go to whoever had driven the old truck as an apology for not having heat air condition in the old one, but I'm not super picky. Offered it to the old guy because seniority, but he turned it down in favor of his truck that he was used to and was fully enclosed. I offered it to the 2 black guys who actually did their jobs and were pretty decent to me when Mike wasn't around, but same thing, they wanted their own enclosed trucks. Okay, cool. Newish truck for me. Spent the first day getting used to it, and stayed late off the clock getting it sparkling clean, inside and out. The only thing it lacked was the new car smell, everything else was polished, cleaned, buffed, shined, etc. Well, apparently, the fact that I didn't bow and scrape to Mike upset him even more, and seeing that new truck out back all shiny and pristine was too much to handle. He was already out on a run when I came in the next day, so I loaded up and headed out as per usual. Got back about 5 minutes before his second run of the day was supposed to leave, and he came storming out before I could even get out of the truck. Screaming profanity, "How dare you take my truck, get the duck out of that thing, get your crap out, that's my truck, I'm gonna take it cause it looks good and I deserves it, you're just a witch, you don't deserve anything nice, I'm gonna duck you up," etc. etc. Side note, I don't tolerate bullies at all, and I don't back down easily. I was always the little kid, growing up, and I learned just how far I could push it, mouthing off and calmly standing up to kids bigger than me because, "Oh, you're so tough? You're gonna pick on a little girl?" As I grew up, I tended to work in men's jobs, so I was used to taking some crap but also drawing a line firmly in the sand and defending it. I am occasionally surprised I haven't gotten decked a time or two, but I've gotten pretty good at reading a situation. Back to the story, I'm sitting in the newish truck with Mike standing outside the door screaming profanity and threats at me. For all the crap that Mike talked though, I got the feeling he was used to getting his way without actual violence. I calmly opened the door and got out, but left my personal belongings in the truck and locked the door behind me. He was doing his damnedest to intimidate me, getting up in my space, finger in my face, personal threats, etc. I started walking toward the office, which was all the way on the opposite end of the warehouse, and he followed me the whole way, still screaming, threats getting worse and worse, apparently ignorant to the fact that literally every single employee had stopped what they were doing and was watching us. I walked into the office and just stood there for about 4 to 5 minutes, staring at the owner while Mike just kept going off. He finally realized I wasn't reacting to him and ran out of steam, and you could see the realization of where he was register on his face, but he glanced over at Tony and smirked, probably figuring he was still untouchable. In the silence that followed, I calmly said to the owner, "You have 4 black guys working in the warehouse." He nodded. "And you have 1 woman working out there." He nodded again, and I saw the light come on. Without looking at anyone else, I said, "I do not want to pull the gender card here, but if something is not done about this situation, I will have to take steps to ensure my safety." I grabbed the tickets for my next run, turned around, and walked back to the warehouse to start pulling the orders. I'm not really sure what happened next, because all the other guys had mysteriously gotten loaded and left on their runs in record time, and I followed not long after. When I got back, Mike was no longer there, and one of the other guys was training the admin lady to be a new driver. Over the next week, I got quiet thank yous from her, Tony, and the other drivers who actually did work. The other slacker guy got fired a while later for possession with intent to distribute, I believe. I left about a year later to drive bigger trucks, but by then we had a pretty solid crew of drivers who helped each other out. The next one is titled, "Doctor told my dad he had cancer when he didn't. Dad decided to hurt him back." This didn't happen to me, but to my dad. My dad passed away several years ago, but before he did he told me about why one summer in 1985 growing up had been particularly stressful. All I knew at the time was that there was a lot of yelling between him and my stepmother, and that my stepmother used to break a lot of things around the house. Us kids would mostly just stay out of the way, or go outside and spend time with friends to sort of be away from it. After a few months, and around the time school started, things had gone back to normal, and there were no more fights between the two of them. I was 14 at the time. For a little background, my dad was a rather large person. 6 feet 4 inches, 275 pounds, and had been fairly athletic most of his life, but was very heavyset in his later years. He was also an attorney, who handled both family law and criminal law. He was a defense attorney in those situations. Being a family law attorney is very stressful, or at least, it was for him. My dad was an avid smoker and at one time was up to 3 packs a day. To be perfectly fair, he was unhealthy, and his smoking and profession lent itself to heart issues. The drinking he did, a couple of shots of Crown Royal after each day at work, didn't help any either. So when talking about this particularly bad summer with him when I was about 23 or so, he told me what had happened. He had had a doctor's visit that spring, and the doctor told my dad he had terminal lung cancer and had 3 months to live. My dad knew the doctor personally. I think he handled his divorce and they became friends or something similar. Obviously, being told you have lung cancer and have 3 months to live hit him pretty hard. Like I said above, I was 14, and I had a younger brother who was 10. I also had 2 older step-siblings, but all 4 of us lived at home. So my dad is distressed. He has kids, a wife, and very little time left. My dad also knows what lung cancer does to someone, and was not looking forward to wasting away, being in a lot of pain, and going through chemotherapy, etc. So my dad tells his wife, and they decide not to tell the kids. Dad is just going to pretend everything is normal and pass on when the time comes. Don't ask me why he thought this or decided this was the best thing to do, and I think it's a terrible decision, but it's what he did. So my dad, who is normally under a lot of stress anyway, is now 10 times more stressed out and not looking forward to dying. He and his wife start fighting a lot, and he starts just threatening to commit suicide so as not to live in pain, etc. My stepmom is obviously upset by all of this, doesn't want him to end his life prematurely, and the fighting keeps going, escalating as time goes on. It got so bad that I guess one day she decides to break all of the shotguns we had in the house to try to prevent his suicidal threats. This led to him throwing things around the house, breaking dishes, etc. It was pretty awful. After a couple of months of this, my dad heads back to the doctor to get an update. I believe he had also been a few times during this couple of months, but I don't know the exact detail. It's at this point the doctor confides in my dad that he really didn't have lung cancer. The doctor had just told him that to try to get him to stop smoking. An incredibly ducked-up way to try to scare someone to stop smoking, in my opinion, probably illegal and unethical as well, but like I said, they knew each other personally, and I think the doctor was just trying to scare my dad straight. So my dad leaves the doctor's office pretty upset. I mean, he had contemplated suicide for the last couple of months, and his home life had been in tatters because of all of this. So this is when my dad decides to get his revenge. Having been a criminal defense attorney, Dad knew some of the local police and local police detectives. My dad called a couple of the detectives, asked them to do him a favor, and had them go to the doctor's office one day. The detectives asked to see the doctor, and when they are let in, they ask the doctor to come with them. They say there's been a pretty bad accident involving the doctor's daughter. The detectives lead the doctor to the hospital basement, and ask him to wait as they sit him down on a bench outside of the morgue. They said they needed to get something ready for him. Then the detectives just left the doctor to sit there worrying about what was going on, and what had happened. The detectives never gave their names, and I'm assuming the doctor was too shocked and worried about what was going on to have asked for them. The doctor never found out what happened, or why someone would do this to him. This was all before cell phones were a thing, and would have had an easy way to call and see what was going on. My dad never spoke to the doctor again. He had heard that the doctor sat on that bench outside of the morgue for an hour crying. But he never let on that he was responsible for it. My dad and I, as we sit and discuss all of this, discuss about how it's wrong to duck with people's kids, but at the same time it's wrong to make someone think they are dying as well. Even if you are trying to trick them into being healthier. The next one is titled, "Fire Me for Not Cheating Your Customers? Get You Bankrupt and Close Down Your Bar." So this happened about 5 to 6 years ago when I worked as an assistant bar manager for the worst bosses ever, who we will call Scum Boss and Less Scum. Backstory. These two are bankers who had too much money and decided to buy a bar whilst not having any hospitality experience between the two of them. When they employed me, I was only a bar assistant, but because of their scumminess and micromanaging habits, it made the bar manager and assistant bar manager quit, and I rose to my position. I was good at my job and have always been in hospitality, so I was qualified to be promoted. Our bar is open from 10 a.m. till 2 a.m. so when I became the manager, I didn't have anyone to do split shifts with, as it took them so long to hire someone else. I'd be working from 8 a.m. till 3 a.m. 6 days a week without any complaints. I liked my staff, but I hated my bosses. I was able to form good relationships with customers, so we had loads of regulars coming in when we were open. The sin. So Scum Boss and Less Scum had no idea how to serve tables, let alone run a bar, but they refused to listen to any of our suggestions and still wanted massive profits. One way was to keep tabs on big party reservations. When the customers in these parties were drunk beyond belief, they wanted us to add items in their orders that they didn't order and manually increase the price for any liquor that they bought by the bottle so that their bill would be higher. The previous staff were compliant in following their orders, but I had my morals, so I refused to cheat customers. Scum boss wasn't happy that I wouldn't listen to him, so he made sure to make it known that he didn't fancy me. He'd constantly berate me in front of new staff or his guests. He'd constantly bring his co-workers in the bar to show off that he was some kind of big shot in the bar, saying that the only reason why some of our regulars came was because they wanted to ogle at my breasts. Les Scum would try to defuse the situation and apologize for his friend, but when he'd get drunk, he'd end up doing the same thing. So finally Scum Boss decided it was time to get rid of me so that they could replace me with a yes man that wouldn't question them, so they decided to sack me and accuse me of stealing tips, giving away free drinks to my regulars and abusing the staff. By this time I already had another job lined up as I had enough of them, so I wasn't really perturbed by losing the job. My issue was that they refused to give me my last paycheck because they had to give my severance, any overtime pay, as well as pay any outstanding annual leave I had. I worked 19 hours a day when I only had to work 8 hours, so I had lots of overtime and had loads of annual leave left, as I couldn't take any vacations because no one could cover me, so they had to pay me a good $6.7k for firing me. The revenge. After holding my rightly deserved money back for 2 months, I decided to report them to some government agencies. I reported them to the manpower department, telling them of my work hours and only being given 30 minutes break time, the treatment of their staff, as well as their habit of hiring people on tourist visas. If you're on a tourist visa, you're not allowed to work, otherwise you're classified as illegal. I also gave the environment agency a ring and report the horrible environment of the bar. We had roaches, rats, and when I told the bosses, they just ignored me and said I should just keep it to myself, in addition to most of their staff not having the proper prior food handling training. My staff resigned when I got sacked, so most of the leftover staff were their yes men who loved sucking up to them. I then met up with some of my regulars who have become my drinking buddies and learned that Scum Boss and Les Scum have been telling customers that looked for me that I quit. So when I told them the whole story of what transpired, they got furious and told all their friends and colleagues to not frequent the bar anymore. They didn't like the bosses as well, but came to the bar because of me. Last I heard, manpower agents audited them and discovered that 80% of the staff were illegals and that they were overworking their staff as well as mistreating them. An environment agent came unannounced the following week and discovered the pest infestation, hence making the bar's cleanliness rating as D. They got fined about $20,000 for this negligence. And because my regulars stopped coming to the bar, they only had 20 to 30% of their usual customers. They ended up going bankrupt and closing the bar. I, on the other hand, got my money as well as a good story to tell. The last one is titled, I Hated My Boss. My boss was the meanest, and just like nastiest woman I have ever met. She was a terrible boss and was mean to every woman in the office. She was really nice to the males though. She'd make comments about our appearance, our work, and things that were irrelevant to our jobs. She really knew how to hit below the belt. She told me that I should focus on my career instead of a relationship because I wasn't the type of girl guys could ever commit to, called a girl going on maternity leave lazy. She told another girl that her heels were way too high and this wasn't a whorehouse. She once even told me an assignment that I had worked really hard for and she had promised me, I'm just going to let Chris and Matt do it because I don't think a girl could handle it. Lots of travel and negotiating involved, like a day before I was supposed to get started. Meanwhile, she was continuously complimenting the guys, saying things like, it's so nice to have an office full of real men, and, you guys can handle anything, I wouldn't be anywhere without my team of boys. She was totally out of hand and inappropriate, even they guys had noticed that her behavior was strange. Anyway, one night I spot her pretty drunk at some random bar flirting with every guy and was just really sloppy overall. Then I saw her take off her wedding and try and slip it into her pocket, but because she was so drunk, she hadn't realized she had dropped it on the ground. I quickly pick it up and pocket it myself. At first I thought my revenge was to let her freak out about it for a little bit and then give it back to her later. But then she started making out with this random guy at the bar and I came up with a much better plan. I, as slyly as possible, snapped a picture of her and the guy, made sure to obscure his face, while making sure it was clearly her. Anyway, I kept the ring and took a picture with the ring on the pinky of my male friend's hand. The following Monday I sent her pictures to her husband with a short note that I ducked your wife and she loved it so much she let me keep her ring. I sort of realized it's not all plausible that she would give someone her wedding ring, but I just ran with it. I kind hoped that the ridiculousness of the letter would be overshadowed by her husband's rage. I ended up anonymously returning the ring as well. It was clearly expensive and I felt too guilty keeping it and quitting a few days later as well. I never got a full follow-up on the effects of my actions, but I do know her and her husband separated after that from one of my old co-workers. Thanks for listening.